Probably the most important air power development since the war began is a long-range fighter plane. The Mustangs, Lightnings, and Thunderbolts that have been escorting big bombers everywhere in Europe. Here's a man who's been flying those long missions. Lieutenant Colonel Alvan Gillem, 2nd of Columbus, Georgia. What were you flying, Colonel?
A Mustang, the P-51.
Well, what was the longest flight you ever made?
Well, I've been over the oil fields of Ploesti, Romania 4 times, and I've been to Vienna, Austria, Toulon, France, and Bucharest, Romania.
Oh, where was your base?
At Foggia in southeastern Italy. We moved down there after the beachhead was established at Anzio. We had to cover that first.
Oh, yes. I want to ask some questions about that a little later. But first, how about these long flights? What impressed you most?
By the time we got back from each flight, the thing that had impressed me the most was the seat. We were off in the air for 6 hours at a time. Otherwise, I guess the most impressive thing was the German flak. Around places like Ploesti and Vienna, it was so thick you could walk on it.
Well, Colonel, just how can you stretch the range of a little fighter like the P-51 so that it will cover so much territory?
Well, we use belly tanks for extra gas and drop them as soon as they're empty.
And you still have enough left for a fight if necessary, huh?
Oh, sure. And incidentally, the P-51's one of the sweetest fighters in the air and one of the toughest. One time over Toulon, I got a burst of flak in my motor. All the way home, I thought it would conk out any minute, but it never did.
Well, Colonel, on an average long-range mission, about how many fighters would you have?
Well, I could hardly tell you that, but I can say that we're flying P-51s. We always felt that we could take on just about any force that Jerry's cared to send up. We had 15 or 20.
Did you run into very much fighter opposition?
It was spotty, sometimes very light and sometimes plenty thick. Before we left the base, each of us would put a couple of dollars in a pot to be given to the highest scoring team when we got back.
Well, we mentioned the Anzio beachhead a while ago. I suppose that was the most exciting job you've ever had, wasn't it?
In some ways. Mostly it was hard work.
Well, Colonel Gillem was in command of the only planes that operated from the beachhead when it was the most heavily bombarded spot in the world. What was your assignment?
We had to be ready all the time to intercept any German planes that came over. We flew right off the beaches within artillery range of the Germans.
Well, that must have been a nice, restful experience.
Well, we didn't get much sleep, but then neither did anyone else. I'm grateful for the experience, though, because it opened my eyes to the hardships the infantry has to put up with and fight through. We usually have it pretty easy at our bases, and we seldom get a chance to see foot soldiers in their foxholes, always wet and dirty and always under fire. Gave us all the respect in the world for the plain GI.
Did you get very much action at Anzio?
Plenty, usually about 3 combat missions a day. We were flying British Spitfires in. The Germans were sending over the best they had. It was our job to keep them away from the beaches where our ships were unloading constantly. It was lively enough, all right. I flew practically 2/3 of my 90 missions while I was there.
And now, after 13 months abroad, I suppose it's pretty good to get back with your wife and daughter for a while.
Wonderful.
Well, I return you now to Admiral in New York.